Welcome everyone to the 4th public beta of Truth Bowl. My name is Ernie. I'll be the activist presenting, and David Gleason will be our gospodar. For this event, we're focusing on a challenge, and the challenge in this context is to optimize education to better prepare students for future flourishing. And the goal is to try and attract people who are interested in coming up with new business models or methodologies that do a better job than the current system of addressing that problem. The format is modeled after Shark Tank, a TV show where investors pitch or receive pitches from innovators or entrepreneurs who are trying to grow their business. What we're doing is what we sometimes call the Shark Bowl, the smaller, friendly version of Shark Tank, where rather than having an antagonist view where the entrepreneur is trying to show themselves at their best possible light, and then the investors are judging them with a simple yes or no, this is intended to be a collaborative process where the activist or entrepreneur is really trying to lay out their thinking as clearly as possible and then invite the angels to comment on it in constructive ways. At the same time, the angels are responsible for rendering a verdict on how well they think the activist has thought through the problem and identified a promising route forward, and to both critique it and judge it. So we will have an initial score after the angels think through the risks and discuss it amongst themselves, and then they will share those concerns and suggestions with the activist. The activist will take a little bit of time to reflect on that and provide a response, and then the angels will provide the final scoring. And the goal is to really train entrepreneurs in how to receive constructive feedback, as well as to celebrate this idea of mutual collaboration around difficult but important ideas. And that's kind of the overall structure. Does anyone have questions about the format or the process before we get started?
Nope.
Okay, and all of you should have received a link to the scoring form in the chat window. And so you can pull that up and have that for taking notes or whatever. And then David, as our moderator or gospodar, will tell you when it's time to do that. All right, so at this point, let's go ahead and I will start my pitch. So the idea in pitching is something I call analog boot camp. And the vision of analog boot camp is to provide focused training around essential soft skills. We have many different ways of teaching hard skills, but I've come to believe that the things that most prepare people for future success fall in the category of what people sometimes call soft skills. And I'll go through an example of what that means. But in particular, I'm really focused on the missional question of how we prepare students for future success. And in particular, there's a new term that's emerged in the last decade or so to describe the future as it is today, and that term is VUCA, V-U-C-A. This term first arose in the military, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the point is that in the last 20 years, really since 9/11, the future has been much more VUCA than in the past. And the strategies and disciplines that we used in the past actually prepare us poorly for a VUCA future. In particular, a VUCA future is characterized by the fact that there's extreme external volatility. The outside world changes rapidly and unpredictably in ways that throw our plans out the window. When this happens, we experience personal uncertainty. Our assumptions and worldview that helped us navigate the world is called into question. And the reason for that is that our models have broken down from relatively simple formal models into very complex models with lots of hidden variables and interdependencies that we don't understand. And one consequence of this is we end up in a place of moral ambiguity, where it's not clear what the right thing to do is, or something that used to be the right thing to do is now exactly the wrong thing to do. And so I'm just going to assert, for the purposes of this conversation, that the future is becoming more and more VUCA. Not that there aren't still places of stability, but it used to be you had wide prairies full of stability with occasional pools and lakes of volatility and VUCA. But now we live in a world where we have islands of stability in oceans of VUCA, socially, politically, culturally, economically, technologically. I believe our students and ourselves are moving into a VUCA world, and we need to prepare them for it. The challenge that we have is our existing traditional education systems really oppose the idea of VUCA. I mean, one could argue that the monastic movement was created over 1,000 years ago to create these islands of stability in a world that had gone into chaos. And that's provided a very powerful foundation for Western civilization and culture, but it's not clear that what got us here will get us to the next level. And so the traditional mode of education really focused on stability, compliance, discipline, and authority. And they tried to resist the world of VUCA by emphasizing these things. And they built some really powerful tools for that. However, my assertion is that those tools do not stand us in good stead in dealing with the modern version of that. And instead, we need to embrace innovation virtues of resilience, ownership, curiosity, and empathy. Just to be a little bit more explicit, in the face of external volatility, you need to be resilient or anti-fragile in order to be able to learn and grow from the change rather than just avoiding it. In a time of personal uncertainty, rather than retreating into mere compliance with past traditions or authority structures or cultural norms, we need to take ownership of our destiny and say, we need to figure out the right way to solve this problem despite the uncertainty. And to deal with the complexity of the world we live in, the way we used to deal with complexity was breaking the world apart into separate disciplines, particularly academic disciplines. And you could separate history from physics, from engineering, from philosophy, from communication. But my belief is that in a VUCA world, all these things are intertwined, and you actually need to replace that sort of narrow discipline with an open-minded curiosity, where you're willing to learn and explore ideas wherever they come from that will help you tackle the issues. And then finally, in a world of moral ambiguity, where there's no clear, obvious right answers, rather than the appeal to authority, which we've used so often in the past, I believe the critical skill is actually having empathy. Is you have to actually identify with the people who are impacted by decisions, and that becomes our moral compass, loving your neighbor, if you will, as the golden rule, and practicing that through the cultivation of empathy. So this all sounds really nice. Everyone says they're in favor of resilience, ownership, curiosity, and empathy. But my hypothesis and the premise I'm starting with is that the reason why we don't adopt these ideas as much as we might celebrate them is that they carry a high cost. In order to really build resilience, you must embrace failure. You have to create a culture where you try lots of experiments, many of which fail, which is contrary to how we typically do education, where failing is seen as a horribly negative thing, as my father and I have discussed many times in the past. The challenge with ownership is when you have people that you're trying to teach or train who take ownership, that generates a lot of conflict. And conflict is the opposite of compliance. One of the differences between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world is that here disruptive is seen as a virtue, whereas in most of the rest of the world, disruptive is seen as a vice. Thirdly, in an area of complexity, in order to be curious, I've discovered you usually must first become confused or surprised. And most people have been trained to feel anxiety in the face of confusion. I often feel like my one real superpower is that I can become confused about things that other people find obvious. And I think we have to be able to embrace confusion and encourage confusion and resist the temptation to have the answer. And finally, the challenge to developing true empathy is you have to be willing to enter into other people's pain. And it's so tempting to want to just lock down the pain of the outside world and retreat to our authority. But my premise is that if we do that, we will miss the skills and the virtues that we need to prepare ourselves for a VUCA future. So this slide is kind of the basic assumptions I'm starting from in terms of the problem to be solved or the challenge to be addressed. And what I want to do is just take a quick break right now for our angels to raise any clarifying questions. If there's anything on this page that is unclear before I go into how I propose to actually address this problem. Anyone like to start?
Well, I think it's an interesting premise. As far as the categories you have of tradition, innovation, and embrace, of course, you could use other terms in there. So what comes to mind in this is, in fact, I think the education I got for my bachelor's degree in a liberal arts school with a Christian foundation provided a lot of these things. And maybe we don't need to look for something radical and new when there's been a model around that gets us quite a ways there. So those are ideas that I've had while you're talking here, Ernie. I think it's a really good model, the way you've got the grid, and it opens up a great deal of space for discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Ernie, if I could offer just one thought.
Sure.
I think this is very engaging, very intriguing. You're describing the future, but and I think this relates to what Chris says. But what I'd like to hear is a little clarification on where we are. Is this today, or is this tomorrow, or is this yesterday? In other words, on a time continuum, you have the monastic tradition, and somewhere in the future, we're going to be all a bunch of droids anyway. So where are we in this time frame?
So I would say that where we are as a society is further on the right. Where we are as our formal educational systems is much more in the tradition camp.
Traditional education.
Yeah, traditional education.
Yeah. John, do you have a thought?
And many other traditional, most traditional institutions value stability, compliance, discipline, authority over failure, conflict, confusion, and pain.
Yeah.
I think that's a safe statement.
I think resolution of those four things is what they really want. Yeah. As opposed to
Ernie, as usual, you've done a very good job of organizing things and analyzing things. I am a product of education from two different worlds. When I did all my undergraduate work in India, medicine in India, and that was based on the British system, which probably all those things you captured, Ernie: stability, compliance, discipline, authority. And then I came here for my residency, and it was totally different. You had stability, and they required compliance and discipline, but the authority part was different. It's not like saying you have to do this way or else. Here, even at the internship level and all the way to my fellowship level, this was in the 70s. I came here in 67. So the teaching and preparing me for the future, they had all these aspects already there. And I think I had to build up on that. Now, where would that fit in your little scheme here, like mentoring, encouraging, and experimenting, and also not afraid to fail? But at the same time, if there's failure, the teacher or the training person is there to catch you. That helped me quite a bit in my field. Now, you can expostulate to a junior high or a bachelor's degree. I don't know what your experience has been. Has there been a mentor there? Has been somebody who's really behind you in everything that you did? And so you were not afraid to fail, basically. Is that part of your scheme, Ernie?
Right. So, okay, let me use that as a segue to the next section. The one thing I think that you guys did bring out, which I think is worth incorporating into the pitch, is that there are certain aspects of our educational system that actually do practice these things. One, as my dad mentioned, is graduate school and professional school. In those cases, you are actually training people to do real-world skills, often in high-pressure situations, medical residency being the extreme example. In those cases, I think you really are way on the right to the scale, where you really are dealing with painful real world problems and working through them. And I think that's really a great example of how education and apprenticeship system works the best. I also think, I'll take Chris's word for this because I don't have much memories of that, but I do think that back in the day before the corporatization and the laser march towards numbers of, dollars and degrees, that a classical liberalized education was intended to be that kind of an experience where you're really grappling with deep ideas and a voyage of self-discovery. And there probably are pockets where that's still the case. So I think, as we discussed once before, even your old alma mater now quotes its success based on the salaries of the graduates. And so and what I think is that we had techniques for trying to incorporate this into education, but they were crumbling. And so, by the way, the two other spots where I think this really actually works well, and I like the best parts of education in modern America is graduate school and preschool, because those are the only places where you're actually learning stuff that you plan to use every day. And I think that's really a key insight which shapes where we're going to the next level. The other place, which is very much like this, is actually extracurricular activities. My friends on the Modern Learners podcast talk about the fact that at the center of the school, it's much more about compliance, discipline, stability, authority. But on the edges of the school, in the after-school programs, in the school newspaper, in sports and things like that, it's much more about failure, conflict, confusion, and pain. Which is why whenever you see a drama or a musical about high school, it's really focusing on what happens in the class. It focuses on what happens in all the larger world. And it's actually kind of a tragedy now that our kids are sort of forced to choose. Anyway, so the goal is that these things still exist in interesting ways. And so my proposal is a way to try and take the best aspects of what we do today and concentrate it in a way that's scalable and repeatable and improvable. So this is what the vision I'm going with the analog boot camp, and I'll try and finish up in 5 minutes. So the first is that if I want to build a new model that's exclusively focused on these key virtues and these key values so we can get really, really good at teaching them, go where the need is the greatest. And for me, that's startups, because they already live in a VUCA world. They already understand they're in an existential crisis full of confusion, conflict, pain, and so forth. And they're also orthogonal to the college experience. Many forms of education have this desire to either fit into the college system or land people in an existing job. And while that is valuable, it tends to focus more on the traditional compliance aspects, where startups are already focused on trying to break new ground in a new way, and they don't care so much about the existing job market or existing college. So they're open to these things. Boot camp, specialized skills for training people is already a common idea and a popular idea in this world. Startups are usually able to pay. They're not really rich compared to corporations, but they're richer than students. And of course, this is where I have my expertise. So it makes a natural sense as a foothold market to focus on this space to see what I can build here. And my proposal is to really start with coaching. It's a zero capital way to really just start mentoring people like I've already been doing. I've had 2 conversations this week with people who have business ideas they're frustrated with, and they want to talk to me about it. And I said, okay, let me figure out how to actually build a business around this rather than just doing it for free in my spare time. And this gives me a great way to start validating my premise. Can I develop content that people will value, that will actually help them succeed in these concrete real-world scenarios that they're facing and trying to build a business? It also helps me to build a brand and spread awareness. And then I can scale it up slowly. I have the screen here. I'm talking with one company about doing a consulting project. I could start a podcast. And then there's different ways, if that gains traction, to do larger and more expensive things like company offsites or Saturday workshops or speaking at a conference. And the goal is that to start with the coaching that I can do on the side, and then I've got a really great boss. I think I can get time off to do this occasionally. Then long term, this could blossom into something much more formal and structured and immersive. So going from an in situ thing where you're helping people cope with their present situation, you can create an in vitro artificial situation, like an entrepreneurship camp for 2 weeks, where kids or college students or professional adults can come and experience this in a safe setting and learn those skills. And the dream someday is to actually have something like a school, but much more multi-generational and entrepreneurial. The other thing about the business model that I want to throw out here is that they say the best way to make a lot of money is to create more value, create a lot of value, and capture a tiny piece. So in order to maximize innovation and reach, I want to make all the content free, all the source code, all the materials under a Creative Commons license, so that people can translate it, use it, improve upon it, because the real challenge is not monetization. The real challenge is obscurity. And it helps to build a community of people who care about these things and help them to really improve on it. And then I would charge for the experiences. So ideas are free, but time is expensive. And then ultimately, if this works, we can license the brand, and then people can charge to be certified. We can charge people to be certified, to train them, et cetera. And one of my dreams is to build a collective. I have several friends who are doing life coaching in various ways, and maybe to organize them into this group so that we can start building this thing together to the extent it overlaps with various passions. Hold on, I got a really quick call. Just make sure it's not from. Sorry, it was spam. All right, fine. The other really interesting I've discovered as I've started down this journey is that the same techniques we use for finding product market fit, understanding what the real problem is and what people want, and delivering something that people will value, is very similar to career counseling, which I've also done some of, especially for high school students who are trying to figure out. If you want to just find a job, you want to be disciplined and focused in it. But if you're trying to find a new career, you need to be curious. And that's a different set of skills than we typically teach people. And it's very similar to what we're teaching here. The other really amusing thing is that this is very similar to the process you go through to find a spouse. You figure out who you are, what you want, and then you figure out what's out there and how will you match that, and learn how to iterate in a way that's authentic and productive, but also realistic. And so I should probably find a better term than spouse hunting, but that's the concept there. And the last bit that I thought about in terms of the company vision is this, Shark Bowl. I realized I have these entrepreneurs who are looking to me for advice, and I could turn that into a thing. I could say, okay, sign up for Shark Bowl. I will train you how to develop a pitch like this, hopefully better, and this will become hopefully the baseline for that they can improve upon in future Shark Bowls. And then once they identify their mission, I can work to find some angels who are aligned with their mission. And then they can then pitch their idea to them in the Shark Bowl setting and get constructive feedback for validating it very cheaply compared to having to actually spend money on advertising or marketing or building a product. And this will help them in terms of building awareness and improving their vision. And then it will help me in that we can create videos of this thing and this advertise this idea of a concept of a collaborative way to help entrepreneurs improve their pitches. Okay, I've probably gone way over time. Let me take another break here for questions.
Yeah, we're at about 15 minutes.
Yeah. All right. So this is the vision of a possible company, Analog Boot Camp, that would attempt to address the challenge defined by those premises by creating something really focused and optimized around teaching those skills.
Yeah, I like the concept that you're talking about, but I missed the link between the nice grid you did about education earlier and what you're actually doing with Analog Boot Camp. I'm sure you said it, but I didn't get it clearly.
No, that's a great point. Let me clarify. So the idea is that the curriculum of Analog Boot Camp is really around those four core values of curiosity, ownership, resilience, and empathy. So you're right, I did not spell that out. But the idea is that the primary way to teach that is by putting people in a VUCA situation and then coaching them to achieve their objective despite the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So that's the concept. And you're right, there's sort of a missing piece in there I should probably spell out more clearly.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Well, I like
Ben,
the
David,
I think it's an exciting idea, and it resonates with a lot of what we've been talking about for the last almost year now. I think the hardest thing for me is to take the concept of the truth bowl or the VUCA bowl or the shark bowl and convert it from a sort of a methodology to a business. And I think that's perfectly valid, but it doesn't flow automatically from the concept of the business. And so
right.
that's just the part I have to need clarification.
Yeah, let me try and give you a metaphor for it. When you are in a high school musical, there is no test. There is no graduation. What there is a performance.
Yes.
And the idea is that the best way to measure soft skills is not by an assessment, but by a performance, right? If you get up on stage and the audience applauds and has a great time, that's how you measure your success. And so the idea being that, waiting until the idea of Shark Bowl, it's a great proxy for real world success in a relatively safe managed environment, in sort of the way that sports used to be a proxy for war.
Yes.
If you will.
Yes. That's great.
All right. Dad, do you have any questions?
Well, I thought you're going to go off and we're going to talk about it and then come back.
Yeah, if you have any clarifying questions.
My comments for my fellow angels.
Okay, so I will go ahead and log off. I'll come back in 10 minutes or so and check it on the chat and see how you guys are doing. All right?
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay. I think, I like some of the things that he mentioned, some of the questions I had about encouragement mentoring. He mentioned that start with coaching, he said, so that was good. And then scale up slowly. I agree with that. In my training, that's how they did it in surgery. You didn't start with doing heart surgery. You started with putting one stage and things like that. So that's a good point. So he had that. Only thing I'm thinking of is we're talking about education and making a productive individual out of our students, those who are getting educated. What he is talking about will be very good for a business model and for maybe graduate school, like he said. So I need to find out from him how you can use it at the lower levels, maybe in junior high, high school, college, bachelor's. Can we use these principles there and how he could apply it? That was how I was looking at it.
Yeah, I think those are good questions and observations. And like I brought up already directly to Ernie is the intermediate step of packaging his business to those different markets like you talked about, John, the junior high and high school, and with a easily understandable value proposition. Because that's not what I'm not getting that. It's not hitting me in the head and saying, oh, I get exactly what he's doing and how he's going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. I think both you and John, it's a fascinating idea. I think it's an exciting idea, but there's a gap between the conception and the realization. And one of the things we've talked about through all of these truth bowls is the different understandings of the purpose of education. That was the very first one we did, the purpose of mass education. Right. And there are widely divergent views of that. And there's also a lot of people who feel that, I think, who feel we're not in a crisis. This is part of the issue with the urgent questions like global warming or the economy. Some people think we're doing just fine, and other people think we're on the brink of a crisis. And I don't know how embracing the crisis mode will bring on the people who think we're doing just fine. They don't see a need for that. They think these other values are still intact. So what's missing for me is how to get everyone on the same page in this regard. I think this assumes a certain point of view that is not widely shared.
Yeah. Good.
I think that is true to a certain extent, but I don't know whether we'll ever be in a situation where we can get everybody on board. And
Of course.
there will, and again, but I think you're right. I think he needs to bring it into more practical steps, so most people will embrace it, even if they don't agree with it. They may say it maybe not for me, but for the general population, this would be a good way to go about it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting he used a VUCA, which is a military concept, because when you're in the military, your job is to put yourself in harm's way. I mean, that's really, I mean, that's what you're there for, right? And that's what they're doing, and they're very good at it. And while it resonates with people. You know, I'd love to be like a Navy SEAL kind of thing. You don't really want to be like a Navy SEAL every day.
Right.
You don't want to do that. And so I think the metaphor is effective for some, and for some situations, I think the focus should be more on the value that you'll get from this experience, as opposed to the crisis that you're going to avert. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Good.
Well, do we have a concise way to explain to Ernie what we just got done talking about? I think we all pretty much agreed with what we all said, but I don't know how to say it concisely.
I don't either. And I'm looking at the score, and I really don't know how to score other than estimated likelihood of success. The other thing that's missing for me is when we say success, and because none of us have watched Shark Bowl, I mean, is it just to get initial funding? Is it to have a successful business? Is it to dominate your market? I'm not quite sure how we're measuring success. And I know Ernie did address success in a different way. He said you focus. I forget now. Anyway, I don't know how to.
Yeah, I think the whole presentation. How is he going to measure success? That's a very good point. Yeah, because in the traditional model, we know how you measure success by higher grades and so on. Right. In this model, how will he measure success? How whether the people understood it or not? So he may have to address that.
Yeah, he mentioned if you were doing some theater or artistic presentation, do people applaud? That's success.
Yes.
So it's real world results or not, but that's pretty tough to measure.
That's not a business. That's not a business.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's what he's talking about, is educating people to, that's part of the fuzziness. And John, you addressed it. Are we talking about junior high, high school, entrepreneurs that already have college degrees or graduate degrees? I mean, what's the target?
Yeah. You cannot really apply what I did as a cardiac surgeon training to, there may be some principles we can still use, but at that level, I had already the basic stuff, and I had a lot of knowledge there that I could build upon. So, but talking about educating the masses, so how do you apply these principles there is the question. And the other thing, metaphor that he used about theater or play, not everybody gets applauded. And some people will get applauded because they had more people that like them in the audience. Things like that happened to me one time. All my people who knew me applauded me, but what about the other people? I think applause, if you go by applause, they won't feel fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and people sometimes applaud for the wrong reason.
Right.
Yeah.
There are other measurements.
Yeah, and again, to me, there's this disconnect between kind of a social movement or social awareness and a business.
Yes.
Those are different.
Yes.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, so the notes I just took, trying to just bring together what we're talking about. We'd like to hear better focus on what the target market is. Is it an entrepreneur that's already got a graduate degree, or is it somebody in junior high, or both, or all, or whatever? This is my language, but I'd like to understand a value proposition that I can really get right away, because once he switched from the grid to what his his analog boot camp was, he lost me. I didn't understand the value proposition. And then the third point is, how do you measure success? His applause analogy, we're having a hard time with that.
Yeah.
So how could I improve what I just said? Or
I think you said it well, Chris. I think I've taken about 6, 7 points, and we can just share those. And you want me to share those in the chat window?
yeah, well, yeah, that's a good idea. You're good at that, David. I'm not. Yeah.
When Ernie comes back, I'll share it in the chat window.
Okay.
That'll be our review.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, good. You're back, Ernie. I think we're ready. Yeah.
Did you hear us, Ernie?
Yep.
Yeah. Just chat him. Come on back, Ernie.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hey.
Hi, Ernie. Welcome back.
All right, thank you.
So we had a good discussion, and David's he's good at doing the chat notes, and he's got some, but I'll just start out. We all kind of had a similar response, and we collaborated on how to say it best, and I guess I'll summarize what I got. One thing is we are a little lost about what your target market is. I mean, is this people that already have graduate degrees that are starting up a business, or are they high school or junior high school kids, or all of the above? So that's one of the 3 points I wanted to bring up. The other is, after the transition from your nice grid to your analog boot camp presentation, and I already said this point to you, really I need to understand what's the unique value proposition. How are you different from a regular consultant? And how does that tie to the educational ideas you have? And then the third point is, we were all kind of lost with how to measure success. I mean, you gave the applause analogy, but we are a little confused about how that really would work. So that's what I had.
Okay,
David?
great. Those are wonderful points.
And David has some.
Do you have additional? More?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. For me, I shared the initial premise, the VUCA premise, but I raised the point. I said this is something that comes from the world of military defense, and these are people who, for a living, put themselves in harm's way, and so they're very good at optimizing that experience and maximizing their survival. But I'm not sure everyone, first of all, agrees with the premise. There are a lot of people who will tell you right now that the world's in pretty good shape and they're pretty happy with how things are. And so using the analogy of the VUCA metaphors, we'll lose people. And so the question is, how do we sort of bring them onto a common understanding? And John raised the point that not everyone's going to agree, but there has to be some common basis for the conversation. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else have points they wanted to raise? Just want to roll?
Say that again?
Does anyone else have any comments or concerns or suggestions?
No, they capsulized it very well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one last thing. This thing that Chris touched on. From the grid to the boot camp, the grid is sort of an analysis, right? It's a perspective, and then the boot camp is a business. And to me, there was a sort of a transition from a concept to concept to practice that I wasn't quite sure how that works. I see the boot camp as one approach, but is that the ideal approach? Is that the only approach? Is that one approach of many? I mean, the analysis is one thing, and the action you take is
Implementation.
The implementation, yeah, is I don't see them matching exactly. I'm not quite sure how they match.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Versus implementation, yeah.
Right, okay. Google's dying on me. Okay, perspect. Okay, great. I think in the interest of time, let me just go in and try and give some replies here. And then as we go through them, you can see if, we'll just go through them one by one and see if I can give you a meaningful answer. So the target market. So I think from a purely practical perspective, there's the dream of what the total addressable market is, and then there's the reality of what is the immediate market where there's a potential. And so right now I have three prospects that I'm discussing, three types of prospects. One is friend entrepreneurs. So in my circle, there are people who want to do a startup or start a business or something like that. And so if I just have a vehicle for working with them, that's something. And that I get something concrete out of it, even if it's just a Shark Bowl video, at least I'm creating an asset out of this effort I'm expending. So that's one. The second is parents of high schoolers. I've had several really intense conversations at work with high school interns or college interns or parents. And this idea of, we are living in a VUCA world and we need skills to prepare for it, which college is not preparing them for, has resonated with them. So like I'm thinking of doing like a free seminar at work over lunch, talking with parents about this because there's interest in something like that. And then the third is actual startups. So I'm already a formal advisor for one startup. I would love to get in a position of being an advisor to more. So the idea is that right now I don't know what the long-term best market is for this or how far this will evolve. It's like everything else is iterative. Because the world is so VUCA, let's go with what I have now and see which one bears fruit. So try a bunch of, and usually the way this works, I'll try a bunch of things, and some of them work and some of them won't, and you'll go wide first to try different ideas, and then you'll discover, okay, this one market is where I should really double down and put all my energy in it, because if I work with just this customer and build a brand around it, then I can actually launch a real business. So that's kind of how I think about the target market. Matchmaking I'll do for fun on the side over drinks rather than probably do it as a business for a while, because that gets scary.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer the question about target market?
Yeah, it does. And it explains why we were confused, because in fact, you are kind of all over the place based on what your opportunity is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ernie, when you talked about, we should have talked about this first. So we'll have an idea of who you're approaching. Whereas if you do this as a startup, and even parents of high schoolers and things like that, your first column there, the traditional thing, doesn't apply to that, right? There's no traditional way of doing startups. There's no traditional way of taking care of the modern high schooler or teenager. So it's all, your principles will apply there, but we didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, the point is that, I'm not sure I made the comment, but if you feel like the question's answered, I will accept it and move on.
Okay.
Let me talk about point 4 first. One of the basic premises of starting a new venture is to shun the non-believers. Is that for every problem you want to solve, there's always a community of people who deny that the problem exists or that it affects them. And those will become a problem later, but at the beginning, you should just ignore them because they are not bought into your worldview. The people you want to listen to are those who share your worldview and are willing to argue with you about the implementation details. So at that point, the VUCA thing is a filter. If people say, that makes no sense to me, then that's the end of the conversation. But if they say, oh yeah, I totally get that, it's a real problem, then we can have a meaningful discussion about the implementation. So that's the, when you're doing a startup as opposed to when you're a large business, you need to focus on the smallest group of people who actually care about what you want to do and ignore the rest of the market. Does that make sense?
That makes it. That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
All right.
You answered number 3. Can you answer number 3?
Yeah, I haven't done 2 yet. So the transfer room is rich. I think there's that's a really good point, and I think that I need to spend more time on it. I think the one thing that is interesting about what David's comment is that if people agree with me about the premise, then we can all agree that we're on a journey together. And the goal is to find lots of people who buy into the overall premise of what the world needs to be like and build this sort of collective approach. It's like, hey, I see this problem. I'm going to tackle it in a completely different way. And that's great. We want to build a community of people who care about this, who see the world the same way. And then all of us can try different ways to experiment and different business implementations to see if we can make an impact, or non-business implementations. And I think that maybe doing a clearer job of separating out the larger scale, sometimes we call that the large scale vision of the world we want to create from the small scale mission of the business I want to build might be a helpful way to split things out.
Well, and I would add another point there is the how, because you've got the goal of both your premise and your business, but what are you going to do? How are you going to do things differently to achieve the goal?
Okay. Yeah, I will.
Yeah,
I'll take that as an action item.
In part by saying, well, the shark poll. By the way, I think this is a really constructive thing to put a true quote entrepreneur or whatever in front of a bunch of angels. I think this is constructive. I think the way we're doing this is working. And just while I'm onto that methodology piece, it's working better. The first time we went to the angels, we all said our thing, and then Ernie responded, all three of us, the collective. I think it's better when you do one-on-one. So David says something, you respond. Your dad says something, I respond, etc.
Yeah.
But it's good for everyone to hear it. Right? It's good for all of us to hear it, because then that addresses a question that we hadn't thought to ask ourselves.
Right.
Let me just talk about one last point, and then we'll go on to the final, which is how do we measure success? I think this is key to the making this work, which was the bonus idea about the Shark Bowl, is that so we've already established that my audience is people who are already living in a VUCA world. Either they're VUCA trying to do a business, or their parents who are trying to prepare their kids for a VUCA world. And one of the challenges is that we have really good assessments for traditional education, right? You can sit down and do a standardized test, memorizing facts, and all these sorts of things. The challenge with performative activities is that the tests tend to be very expensive and time-consuming and subjective. And so the goal is that living in a VUCA world, all these things like resilience, ownership, whatever, you can't pass that on a written exam unless it's really about writing an essay, being the skill involved. You have to test it in the real world. And so there's two ideas I have to do that. One is that I work with people who are in the real world. So coaching people who are doing a startup, and I have a startup that's going to either succeed or fail in the next 3 months, and I'll find out, whether at least one data point about whether I was able to help them with that. But the other way is to create miniature experiments, like the way you have a practice performance in front of your music teacher before you go practice in front of the judge, or before you play your first concert. And so the idea is that a key part of what I need to do is really creating new metrics and performance venues so that people can find out what they're made of, if you will. They can find out how well they're learning these skills in a safe, controlled environment. They can work through that, and then mentoring them through that. All right, we are at 3:58, and I want to leave time for a postmortem afterwards. So at this point, I'm going to let my dog in who's freaking out, and maybe you can all fill out the rest of your surveys, and then we'll wrap things up.
Okay.